All right, everyone, welcome to the Tonto's Demise Week 9 recap. Whole lot of things happened this week. We had some interesting moves here in the terms of the standings. Let's see. I know we're getting at it a little bit late here, so we have to take a look back here. Going back and forth here on Yahoo. Well, the most interesting thing probably is that there is no longer one single team in first place. We now have 4 teams, all tied at 6-3. Once again, I think we had this before. The symmetry of the standings here: 4 6-3s, 2 5-4s, 2 4-5s, and 4 3-6s. So 4, 2, 2, and 4 here, lining up our standings. Let's see. Gags has overtaken first place here, looks like. So we got Gags, Huber Squashers, Mighty Midgets, and New Gods Mad Titans, all tied for first place. And here coming up very soon in Week 10, maybe I'll get back to that at the end of this recap, but some pretty good matchups this week coming up that are, I think I said this last week, that the next 2 weeks what could really determine the playoff push, and it's definitely shaping up that way because I'm not sure that the teams at the top are playing each other. They're all playing. The teams at the top seem to be playing teams at the bottom, so it's going to be tough for. Excuse me. It's going to be tough for those lower teams who want to try and crawl back into it. A lot of the 3 and 6s are playing 6 and 3s, so that could basically give 7 to. Well, you could have 7 wins or you could have 7 losses, and that pretty much either guarantees you a playoff spot or is probably going to eliminate you from the playoffs. So this week coming up here is probably one of the most important that we're going to have all season, so I'm very interested to see what happens here. But we're not here to talk about Week 10. We are here to talk about Week 9. So, sorry, you have to excuse me. I got a little bit of a cold, so if my voice sounds funny, that is the reason. Funnier than usual, I guess, to most everyone. So, I got the Donald Trump sniffles. Let's see. I think it's my microphone. Something wrong with my phone's microphone. I'm just kidding. Anyway, first matchup of Week 9 was the defending champion Springfield Isotopes going up against the Dub C Hooligans, and Dub C takes this one down, moving him from 4-4 to 5-4. Final score here was 176.55 to 151.5. We had big scores here for the quarterbacks, as Dub C had Drew Brees with just under 59 points, while James Winston for the Isotopes, he had about 47.5 points, but he went out near the end of that game with an injury, and Mike Glennon came in and actually tacked on about 20 points. So Winston ended up being close to 70, about 67, 68 points when it finally came down to it. So pretty good matchup there. Then the wide receivers is where this one definitely swung back in favor of Dub C, as he had Emmanuel Sanders, Jordan Matthews, and Golden Tate. Sanders, 9.7, Matthews, 14.8, and Tate an even 25. While the Isotopes could only get, Jarvis Landry, 6, Tyreek Hill, 4, and Cooks, 11.5. So even though we had Brees against Cooks here, the wide receiver versus the quarterback, unfortunately, Drew Brees did not do too much to Brandon Cooks. That could have perhaps swung this one in the other direction, but I said Landry 6, 4, and 11.5. So Golden Tate all by himself here with his 25. He was better just by himself than all three Springfield Isotopes wide receivers here this week. Running backs, Dub C had Booker and Hightower. Booker, only 20 rushing yards. Hightower, 87, and he did have a touchdown. So you got about 16, 17 points from those two guys, while the Isotopes only got 2 points from Terrence West and 2.5 from Matt Asiata. So a pretty miserable performance there. Just under 5 points, looks like, from those two guys. Tight ends, once again, not much here, as Barnage only went for 5.3, and Pitta only went for 3.4. Flex position, though, was interesting because we had a battle of the two Tennessee Titans running backs, DeMarco Murray versus Derrick Henry. And Henry actually, I believe, got injured right before the game, and I don't know if you actually played at all, but he ended up with 0. He didn't play at all, I think. So that gave a big boost to DeMarco Murray here, but unfortunately fortunately he was in the flex here because most of his stats came from receiving. He had 7 catches and a touchdown, rushing touchdown. He ended up with 21 points, so 21-0 there. Still not quite enough to swing this one back over, because the difference here was also the kickers. I know they skip over the kickers in the podcast, but sometimes they actually play an important role here. We only had, looks like 6 points for the Isotopes kicker, while Matt Bryant, he kicked a bunch of field goals, including long ones, 50-yarders, 40-yarders, several PATs. I think he had 16 points, if I remember correctly. So there's a 9 or 10 point difference there. And then defenses, we had Dub C Hooligans picking up the San Diego defense, playing them against his own flex player, Henry, which that turned out to not matter. But playing him against DeMarco Murray. And it ended up being a good plug and play because Marcus Mariota committed 2 turnovers, and they were both returned for touchdowns. So that's 18 points right there. San Diego did, they gave up a ton of yards and a ton of points, but they did get those turnovers and touchdowns. So that was a big boost here for Dub C Hooligans. While Kansas City Chiefs defense was at home against the Jacksonville Jaguars, they actually had 4 turnovers, but they got they gave up a ton of yards. I don't think we got any points for first downs or rushing yards or passing yards or anything. So Yahoo says 20. I think it was maybe a little bit more than that, but right around there. So it was a pretty good matchup here in terms of defenses. But yeah, it really came down to the wide receivers there. The Isotopes got hardly anything from their trio, while Golden Tate, just by himself, outscored the 3 of them. Obviously, not making excuses, but the Isotopes were without Spencer Ware, LeGarrette Blount, Randall Cobb was hurt, Jordan Reed was off, but so was Dub C. He had some problems too with injuries and some bye weeks. He didn't have the Arizona Cardinals defense or Lamar Miller, but was still able to make a good pickup with San Diego defense, and that was pretty much it here. So with that win, Dub C Hooligans, he moves up to 5-4. He's in 6th place now, and Isotopes, they drop to 3-6, and they are all the way down in 9th place now. All right, next we had the Huber Squasher finally playing a Huber, the best 2 weeks of the year, and the Huber Squasher gets Huber squashed, as the final score is New Gods Mad Titans 165.05 to Huber Squasher 129.25. Let's see, New Gods had Phillip Rivers going up against Tannehill. Rivers 45.5 to Tannehill's 28. Wide receivers, New Gods Mad Titans, looks like he had Doug Baldwin, Mohamed Sanu, and Brian Quick. Baldwin 15, Sanu 12.5, Quick just under 9. So looks like 26, 34, 35, between 35 and 36 points from your 3 wide receivers. While Huber Squasher, he had Amari Cooper, Jordy Nelson, and Fast Willie Snead. Let's see. Cooper, 11.5, Nelson, 22.5, and Snead, 6.5. So looks like about 40 points from your 3 receivers. But then here is one of the big differences. New Gods Mad Titans, as we know, he's got a good, one of the best running back duos here with Melvin Gordon and Le'Veon Bell. Gordon had just under 200 yards rushing and a touchdown, while Bell, unfortunately, I don't think he's scored a touchdown yet this year, has he? But he only had 32 rushing yards. Most of his stats, once again, came from receiving, but you didn't get him in the flex here. But still, Gordon with the 196 rushing yards, that's 22 points, 23, and a touchdown, so 30. So about 33 points from your running backs. While the Huber Squashers, they got Jonathan Stewart and Alfred Morris with 42 and 56 yards respectively. So that's just about 9.5, 10 points. Tight ends, we had Antonio Gates. We had the Phillip Rivers to Antonio Gates connection here versus Greg Olsen. Actually, a pretty good matchup there, pretty even. Gates, 18.5 to 16.2 from Olsen. Both of them had a touchdown. Both of them had 5 catches. But Gates had a little bit more in terms of yardage. Then flex players, we had Terrell Pryor versus Charkandrick West. Pryor wins this one. He had 15.7, while Charkandrick West, 10.4. Kickers were pretty even, as New Gods had Graham Gano versus Justin Tucker. Probably 2 of the better kickers in the league. Looks like Gano had 2 field goals and a PAT, while Tucker, same thing, 2 field goals and a PAT. But the edge here went to Tucker because his field goals were 40-yarders and Gano's were 30-yarders. And then defenses, we had Philadelphia Eagles versus Seattle Seahawks. Philadelphia didn't do too much. They had 2 turnovers and a sack, but they gave up a lot of points, a lot of yards. Yahoo says 7. It might have been maybe a little bit more than that, or pretty close because they lost, so you lost a couple points there. But Seattle for Huber Squashers, I think he needed Huber Squashers going into Monday night. He was trailing by about 35 points. So he needed a huge game from the Seahawks defense. Although even though New Gods Mad Titans still had Doug Baldwin, who bumped up another 15 points for him there. But I think Seattle's D looks like they got about 14 points. So they gave up a ton of points and a ton of yards. And so what ended up being a surprising shootout against the Buffalo Bills there in Seattle. So unexpected there. But looks like they had 5 sacks and a turnover. So they gave up a lot of yards and points, but they won the game. Said 14. Still not too bad. But it wasn't enough here to get past the New Gods Mad Titans. Biggest difference was obviously the quarterbacks, about an 18-point difference there. And so the wide receivers were fairly even, but Melvin Gordon tipped this one in favor of New Gods Mad Titans. And with that, both teams are now tied at 6-3, but in terms of overall points, looks like the Huber Squashers are still a little bit ahead. He drops from first place to second, and New Gods Mad Titans, he is now in 4th place. All right, the next matchup, we had another Huber, Jay, going up against Josh. Battle of the Jays. Everybody Ertz versus Cobra Brianna. I'm not sure what that is, but That is the new name of the Twerkin Bowl Cuts. And Twerkin took this one down. Sorry, not Twerkin, Cobra. Uh, going over 200 points this week with 201.9 to Everybody Ertz 169.25. Still, 169.25, pretty good score, but it's pretty good. A lot of stats here, but let's see. It wasn't enough. Quarterbacks. This one actually went in favor of Everybody Ertz. He had Mariota with 57 versus Bortles with 45. And Cobra's wide receivers, he had Macklin, Diggs, and Humphreys. And even though he still goes over 200 points, getting a 0 from Macklin, but he did get, looks like, 22 from Diggs and 15.5 from Humphreys. So there's about 37, 38 points overall from your three receivers. Not too bad. As for Ertz, he had Crabtree, Marshall, and Devontae Parker. Crabtree, surprising here, but I think it was with Denver defense, so maybe not too surprising. But Crabtree, only 2 for 27. Marshall, 6 for only 45. And Parker, only 2 for 8. So you got about 17 points from your 3 wide receivers. That hurts. Said Diggs. So yeah, Cobra had Diggs outscore your wide receiver trio just by himself there. That's never a recipe for victory. Excuse me. Cobra, his running backs. Another good game from them. He had Murray and Ajayi. Looks like Murray, he had over 100 yards and 3 touchdowns. While Ajayi, he was over 100 yards also and just 1 touchdown. So what is that? 18 and 14 is 32. Plus 20. So what, 52? 53 points? Wow. 53 points from your 2 running backs. You're not going to get that every week, but you'll definitely take it when it happens. Which, unfortunately, said for Ertz, because he got some decent scores from his running backs here, as he had Devontae Freeman and Mark Ingram. Ingram was one of the only long touchdowns of the week. He had like a 75-yard touchdown run, something like that, which got you an extra 3 points there. He had ended up with 158 yards and that touchdown. He also had a receiving touchdown, so even though you didn't get the receiving stats, you did get the touchdown. And looks like Freeman, he didn't score, but he did have 77 yards rushing. So I keep forgetting about the Devontae Freeman effect, but he didn't score here, and you lost. So maybe it's still a thing. Tight ends, another great matchup here. Wow. Jimmy Graham versus Jason Witten. And this one actually went in favor of Everybody Ertz, as Jimmy Graham had 8 for 102 touchdowns, 30.3, while Witten, he had 134 yards on 8 catches, and he also had a touchdown, 27.4. So, wow, two great matchups there at the tight end position. Graham versus Witten. It's like it's 2012 all over again, Jimmy Graham and Jason Witten. Flex plays, we had Cobra with Theo Riddick, 8.6, and Ertz had to pick up somebody and play him here in this spot, and he went with CJ Procise, who only got 2.5. Kickers were pretty even. Looks like Hauschka had 4 PATs and 1 field goal. Vinatieri, 4 PATs and 1 field goal also. Except his Vinatieri's field goal was only a 20-yarder. Let's see. Green Bay defense for Ertz versus New Orleans defense for Cobra. Let's see. New Orleans looks like they had 4 turnovers, but they did give up a lot of yards and points. Yahoo says 16. I think it was a little bit more than that. And for Ertz, he had Green Bay's defense. Tough matchup for them against the Indianapolis Colts. Looks like they did have 2 turnovers and 2 sacks, but they lost the game. Gave up a lot of points there, so Yahoo says 8. Might have been right around there. But again, despite that 0 from Macklin, it wasn't enough. Those good tight end matchup. And even though Ertz won the quarterback matchup here, you lost the wide receiver matchup. Again, it was a great, just really impressive here. These running backs and tight ends here in terms of points and production. But it said it's everything ended up swinging back over into favor of Cobra, thanks to all those touchdowns from Latavius Murray. Let's see. Yeah, I mean, everybody else, you put up another good matchup, but just wasn't quite enough this week up against a 200-point team. While Cobra, he has risen all the way up from the basement to 7th place. He's actually 4-5 now. Wow, unfortunately, everybody Ertz, speaking of the basement, you are now back in it. You are 3-6, and you are in 12th place. So maybe, just not to get ahead of ourselves, but maybe you finding the cursed Philip Rivers jersey somewhere in your closet or whatever it was, you can just, instead of getting it from Jimmy, you just might be able to keep it this year for next year here. So we'll see. But anyway, again, Cobra, he is in 7th place, and Ertz in 12th place. 4-5 and 3-6 respectively. Next matchup, we had another two hondos here put up on the detonators. Probably should stop talking about those hondos because bad things keep happening to you. And let's see, FC Bohoric versus the detonators. Excuse me. FC Bohoric 203.8 to the detonators 144.25. Let's see. It was a tough matchup here for detonators. His quarterback Stafford going up against Minnesota Vikings defense, and he did okay. Probably better than you were expecting. But let's see. Not nearly as good as Matt Ryan, who I think that was a Thursday night game. He was over 300 yards and 4 touchdowns. Just under 60 points for Matt Ryan, while Stafford had just under 39. So about a 20-point difference there. Let's see. Wide receivers, FC Bohoric, he had Tyrell Williams, Odell Beckham Jr., and Mike Wallace. I think Wallace was the other long touchdown of the week, so he got a bonus 3 points there. Looks like Williams, he went 6 for 65 and a touchdown. Beckham Jr., 4 for 46 and 2 touchdowns. And Wallace had I think it was a 95-yard touchdown. Despite that, he only had 3 other catches for 30 yards here, but still, the 95-yarder will get you good numbers every week here. Let's see, what was that wide receiver total here? Looks like about close to 60, I think, here. Maybe a little bit more than 60 from the FC Bohoric's wide receiver trio. While the detonators, he had T.Y. Hilton, Marvin Jones Jr., and Mike Evans, who FC Bohoric was definitely nervous after the Thursday night game because, as we all know, Mike Evans went off for 11 catches, 150 yards, and 2 touchdowns. 41 points on Yahoo here. But unfortunately, then, T.Y. Hilton and Marvin Jones, they combined for 15, giving you just about 56 with the fractions here. It's about 57 points from your 3 wide receivers. So pretty good pretty close matchup there in your 3 wide receivers. Said 60 to 57. That's pretty good. Let's see what's next. Running backs. We had FC Bohoric playing both at least 2 of the New York Giants running backs. Not sure exactly how many they have. Rashad Jennings and Paul Perkins. Looks like Jennings, 26 yards. Perkins, 32 yards. No touchdowns for either one. So 5.8 points there. While detonators had Anton Smith and Bilal Powell. Smith looks like he had 25 yards, no touchdowns. Powell, 22 yards, no touchdowns. So two pretty miserable running back performances here. What, 5.8 to 4.7? Tight ends dominated here by FC Bohoric. He had Cameron Brate versus Dwayne Allen. 15.3 for Brate. And Dwayne Allen, only one catch for 15 yards. 2.5 points. Flex plays, pretty even here. We had Ty Montgomery versus Kelvin Benjamin. Just about as even as you can get, because looks like Ty Montgomery had 12.1, but just a little bit more there for Benjamin as he had 12.6. So pretty even there. Kickers, also pretty even. Couple field goals, couple PATs for each guy, McManus and Janikowski. McManus for FC Bohoric, Janikowski for the Detonators. And then defenses, another good matchup here. Baltimore, they did have a defensive touchdown, a turnover, did pretty good, didn't give up a whole lot of yards. I think once it was actually, even though the game was ended up being kind of close, it was garbage time there for the fourth quarter. I think the Steelers only had one or two first downs going into the fourth quarter or something like this, something like that in that. But said once Baltimore, they had like a 21-0 lead or 21-7, and they kind of let the Steelers get back into it a little bit in some garbage time there. But still, Baltimore looks like they had 20 points on Yahoo. It was probably a little bit more than that. While the Detonators went with the Detroit Lions defense, going up against a tough matchup at Minnesota. And they actually did get the win there. Didn't give up a whole lot of points. Looks like they blocked a kick, had a couple sacks. They did okay. Let's see. Looks like they had, Yahoo says 11. Might have been a little bit more than that. So, let's see. Take a quick look here what the differences were. Set a 20-point difference there in quarterbacks. The wide receivers were fairly even, but ended up going a little bit in favor of FC Bohoric. Running backs were pretty much a wash, but it did favor FC by, a point or so. And then tight ends, a 13-point difference in favor of FC. And kickers, a 2-point difference. And Baltimore was about a 10-point difference there. So what is that? 20, 12 is 32, 32, 33, 34, 44, which the difference here was 60. So let's see, maybe Baltimore was even more than 20. Might have been a lot more than 20. Because I think the Steelers did get ended up with a decent amount of passing yards, but very few rushing yards. So I actually think Baltimore's defense must have gotten way more. They might have been around 30 actually. So that was those were the big difference makers there. FC Bohoric, he is now both teams are now 3-6. FC moves up to 3-6, while the Detonators drop to 3-6. FC, he is though still in 11th place, while the Detonators, despite the loss, they are just above FC Bohoric in 10th place. The next matchup, we had a good one here versus, Mighty Midgets versus Disco. Unfortunately for Disco, he kind of crashed and burned here this week, as the difference was about 50 points here. Mighty Midgets takes it down 173.85 to Disco with only 119.75, just under 120. Quarterbacks, Mighty Midgets had Aaron Rodgers with 54, while Andrew Luck only 36.5. So big point difference there, almost 20 points. Wide receivers, Mighty Midgets had Allen Robinson, Des Bryant, and Corey Coleman. Allen Robinson, maybe he's going to come back here from a disappointing. Maybe he's going to turn it around from a disappointing first half of the season. He had 7 for 76 and a touchdown. Des Bryant, only 1 catch for 20 yards, and Coleman, only 3 for 41. So it looks like you got about 30 points from your 3 receivers, while Disco, he had Michael Thomas, Allen Hurns, and Tavon Austin. And pretty much all the points, looks like, came from Michael Thomas, who had 5 catches and 2 touchdowns. He had ended up with 24.3. Hurns, not sure, I think he got injured somewhere during the game. He ended up with a big 0. No catches there. While Tavon Austin, he had 1 catch for 17 yards. So, looks like you got 25 points, 26 from your 3 wide receivers. So that's actually fairly even, 26 to 30, not too bad. But still, Disco is way down there already from the quarterback difference. Next up, we had running backs. Midgets had Forte and Harris from the 49ers. I'm not even sure what his first name is. But anyway, Forte looks like he had 92 yards and a touchdown, while Harris, what did he have? He had a receiving touchdown and 60 yards rushing. So 14 and 9 is 23, and 6 is 29. So just about 30 points from your 2 running backs. While Disco, he had Ezekiel Elliott and TJ Yeldon. Elliott in that, I guess you could say, dream matchup against the Cleveland Browns there. He actually was held under 100 yards rushing. He only had 92, but he did have 2 touchdowns. So that's about 21 points there. Yeldon, he actually did most of his damage in the air with 5 catches, but those didn't count for you. And he did catch a touchdown, but he only had 33 rushing yards. So that's about 8 points. So, about 28, 30 points there from your 2 running backs? Still, that's a pretty good total. Tight ends, Midgets went with Lance Kendricks from the LA Rams. I want to say St. Louis Rams. But no, they are the LA Rams now. Let's see, he had an even 16 points. While Kyle Rudolph for Disco, he only had, well, he had 1 catch for 1 yard, but that 1 catch was a touchdown. So 7.1 for you there. Flex players, interesting here, as both teams also flexed a tight end here. So we had 4 tight ends going in this matchup, and actually went in favor of Disco, who had Ebron with 16.2, 1 point ahead of Delaney Walker for Midgets with 15.2. Kickers, Sturgis looks like he had a couple field goals and a couple PATs. But all his field goals were 30. He had 2 30s and a 20. While Bailey, no field goals, he made 5 PATs. So only 5, obviously, for Bailey. And Sturgis, he had about 10 and a half, something like that. Another big difference here was defenses, as Denver versus Carolina, which what seemed like on paper would be a great matchup here. But Denver, they went up against Oakland. They gave up a lot of yards and a lot of points. They lost the game. They didn't get any turnovers. They only had 2 sacks. So Yahoo says 2. I think it might have been right around there, maybe 5, something in that ballpark. But Carolina defense for the Midgets did pretty well. Didn't give up a whole lot of yards. Had 4 sacks and 1 turnover. Only gave up 10 points here, it looks like. Yahoo says 13. I think it was definitely more than that. But it wasn't enough here to get a win for Disco. Said only 120 points. That's going to get you a loss pretty much every week here. Good matchup from the Midgets. Biggest differences, again, were the quarterbacks there, the tight ends, and the defense. So, not too much you can do. When it said Disco had that 0 from Hurns, only 1 catch from Austin, 1 catch from Kyle Rudolph. That's always going to hurt you, even though he had a pretty good matchup there with Luck versus Green Bay. Thomas, 2 touchdowns there, good. Ezekiel Elliott matchup, you would have liked to see a little bit more even though he did score 2 touchdowns against Cleveland there. And obviously a big letdown from the Denver Broncos defense, although in a matchup where the difference was 50 points, the defense probably wasn't the biggest factor here, though. So, again, Midgets, he pulls out the win. He moves up. He is also 6-3. He is in third place now, while Disco, he drops under 500 to 4-5. He is now in 8th place. And the final matchup was another good one. We had two of the top teams in the league so far this year. Possum Magic versus From Gags to Riches. Although Possum Magic, I believe, is on a several game slide. And it continues here this week with From Gags to Riches taking it down. Looks like the final score, 174.95 to Possum, 131.7. Let's see, quarterbacks. Gags to Riches had Cam Newton with just under 37 points. He was outscored here by Roethlisberger for Possum. Despite a very miserable start to that game, he ended up with actually 43.5 points. Not too bad. Wide receivers, Gags had Demaryius Thomas, Julio Jones, and Antonio Brown, as we know. Let's see, Thomas, 10.5 points. Julio, 25, just over 25, and Antonio, 21.5. So looks like you got about 57 points from your three receivers, while still not a bad performance from Possum's receivers. He had Britt, Moncrief, and Anunwa. Britt, 4 for 50 and a touchdown. Moncrief, 3 for 55 and a touchdown. But Anunwa, only one catch for 25 yards. So Britt, just under 15. Moncrief, 14.5. Anunwa, 3.5. So that's just a little over 30, 31-ish, 30, maybe close to 32 with the fractional points there. So you got pretty much doubled up by the Gags to Riches wide receiver core here. So looks like that might have been the biggest difference here in this matchup. Running backs, Gags had Gurley and McCoy. Gurley, no touchdowns, 48 rushing yards. McCoy, no touchdowns either, 85 rushing yards. So that's 13.3 points. While Possum Magic looks like he had Christian Michael, who only had 1 rushing yard, but that 1 rushing yard was just much like Kyle Rudolph. It was a 1-yard touchdown. So you got 6.1 from Michael. And looks like Crowell had pretty much everything Crowell got was receiving. He only had 4 rushing yards. So you only got a total of 5 rushing yards from your 2 running backs. And fortunately, Michael did get a touchdown there. So 6.5 points from your 2 running backs there. That hurts. Let's see. Tight ends. I believe Possum picked up and played Hooper from Atlanta, who went for actually did pretty good. He scored a touchdown. He went for 13.5, while Kelsey went for 10.8 for Gags to Riches. Flex plays. We had Gags with Devontae Adams 14.1 versus Darren Sproles for Possum, and he had 10.1, so a 4-point difference there. Kickers, Lambeau versus Santos. Looks like each one had a couple PATs. I think Santos took this one here just by a little bit since he kicked a bunch of field goals. Looks like he had a 50-yarder, a 30-yarder, a couple of 20-yarders, while Lambeau, he kicked a bunch of field goals himself, but he also had a couple PATs, but those longer field goals for Santos swung this one just a little bit in his favor. And then defenses, which had been one of the strongest points of Possum Magic's team here going into the past couple weeks here, Minnesota Vikings defense. But they did not do very well here against the Detroit Lions. It looks like they only had one sack, 1 turnover, lost the game, didn't do too well. Yahoo says 7. Might have been a little bit more than that. Not exactly sure. But Gags to Riches, he had Dallas versus Cleveland. Obviously, a good matchup for any defense. They didn't give up a whole lot of points, but they only had 4 sacks. They got the win, no turnovers. I think they did give up a pretty decent amount of yards, except for, well, maybe not rushing yards, because like I said, Crowell only had 4 rushing yards there. So Yahoo says 10 for Dallas's defense. I think Gags asked me what the Dallas defense total was, and I think it was the actual total. Was it like 20 something? 28? It was pretty high because they didn't give up. You got a lot of points there from the yards given up there. And first downs, I think, too, was a factor there. But it was enough here for Gags to Riches with 175 to get the win over Possum Magic. Like I said, the biggest difference, let's see, it was about a 40-point margin of victory here. And the biggest difference, again, was Gags to Riches wide receiving core doubling up Possum's wide receiver core. And those 5 rushing yards combined from Magic's running backs, that'll hurt you every time. And just wasn't quite enough here for Possum Magic. He drops to 5-4, while Gags to Riches, he moved up to 6-3, and he also takes over first place since he is the highest point total there, which I think he actually might be the highest point total in the league for the season here now, just by a little bit. But the good news here for Possum Magic is, even though you only got 131.7, you actually did survive the knockout pool because Huber Squashers only got the 129.25. So Huber Squashers are knocked out of the pool. The remaining teams, according to my list here, is you, Possum Magic, the Springfield Isotopes, and the Dubsy Hooligans. So only 3 teams left. Somebody will get knocked out this week, and then we'll see who takes it next week here in Week 11. Whereas obviously in Week 11 is where the knockout pool is always decided. So that's pretty much it for Week 9. Let's take a quick look here at the week coming up, where I started talking about it a little bit back at the beginning here. And this could be a huge week in terms of determining the playoff spots. So I have to wait and see what happens, because we could have a handful of teams here get their 7th win of the season. We have first matchup. We have Isotopes versus Midgets. Said a 3-6 versus a 6-3. So each one of you is going to get possibly get a 7 there. So the Midgets are going to look to knock the Isotopes possibly out of playoff contention, and himself in there. Let's see. New Gods, he's a 6-3 versus FC. That's another. He's 3-6. So New Gods could move himself into playoff contention and knock FC Bohoric probably out. Let's see. Where are the other 6-3s? Huber Squashers, he is going against Cobra. So he could possibly get himself to 7 wins, or Cobra might get himself back to 500. We'll have to see what happens there. Going to be interesting. And the other, same situation here with the other 6-3. Gags to Riches, he is going against Disco, who is also looking to get himself back to 500 at 5-5. So so yeah, these matchups are going to be really good. We got Possum versus the Detonators. Possum is trying to avoid falling to 5-5. He is on a 3-game losing streak. And the Detonators said they are 3-6. They're trying to avoid getting their 7th loss, which would all but eliminate them from playoff contention. So, yeah, this week is going to be really interesting to see. Hopefully, we have some upsets to keep things interesting here for the last couple of weeks. Otherwise, we could possibly have 4 teams go to 7 wins and 4 others go to 7 losses, which would basically leave the last that would pretty much leave the last two playoff spots being fought for by 4 teams. So 2 spots for 4 teams. You'd like to see a few more teams fighting for those last couple spots there. So it's going to be fun to see what happens. Hopefully, things get mixed up a little bit and it's not too lopsided here in terms of the standings here. So, all right. Sorry for having this putting this out later than usual, but it was a bit of an unusual week here. Let's see. So that's pretty much it. Week 10 coming up. Week 9 in the books. Let's see. Yeah, that's it. So, all right, guys. Thanks for listening, and assuming you made it this far, and yeah, we'll see you back here again next week. All right, guys. Thanks and good luck.